On the evening of April 30th, 1926, three state highway officials sat around a table in a room at the Colonial Hotel in Springfield, Missouri, and discovered that the number they wanted was already taken. Cyrus Avery of Tulsa, Oklahoma, had spent months lobbying the federal government for a continuous highway running from Chicago to Los Angeles. He had wanted to call it US 60. Kentucky had objected. That number belonged to a road through their state. The number 62 was offered as a compromise. Nobody liked it. So the men went down the list of unassigned numbers until Avery found one he and his colleague, Frank Page, agreed sounded right. 66. Catchy. Avery sent a telegram to the Bureau of Public Roads in Washington that same evening. Regarding Chicago-Los Angeles Road, if California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Illinois will accept 66 instead of 60, we are inclined to agree to this change. The Secretary of Agriculture approved the designation on November 11, 1926. That is how the most famous road in the world got its name. Not from geography, not from engineering, from a telegram sent on a spring evening because Kentucky needed a number. The road was built through political will, not natural logic. It passes through towns because men decided it should pass through their towns. That is its great strength, and it is the mechanism of its death. Every town that grew rich because Route 66 ran down its main street would one day learn what happens when someone decides the road should run somewhere else. Most of the road didn't exist yet. When the designation was approved in 1926, only about 800 of its 2,448 miles were paved. The rest was graded dirt, gravel, brick, and in some stretches nothing more than parallel ruts in the desert. The promise was in the telegram. The road was not. Before the automobile, before the highway, before the number, there was the route. In 1857, 29 years before the first gasoline-powered car, Congress gave a United States Army lieutenant named Edward Fitzgerald Beale $200,000 and orders to build a wagon road along the 35th parallel, from Fort Defiance near the New Mexico and Arizona border to the Colorado River. Beale was confident the route would become, in his words, the great emigrant road to California. The federal government funded his certainty. What Beale surveyed and cut and graded through the desert would become the backbone of Route 66. The 35th parallel had its own logic. It was the most temperate crossing of the continent, far enough south to avoid the mountain snow that killed other crossings, and far enough north to avoid the killing deserts of the Southwest's lower reaches. Native American trading paths had followed it for centuries. The Mojave Trail, the Beale Road Corridor, the tracks of the Hopi and Navajo. The Spanish came next. Then the Anglo-American wagon trains. Then the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1880s, running through Flagstaff and Albuquerque and Amarillo on alignments that later became Route 66 itself. The car changed the need, but not the route. When the number of registered vehicles in the United States jumped from 450,000 in 1910 to 8 million in 1920, Americans began demanding paved roads. The good roads. Movement lobbied state and federal legislators. Congress passed the Federal Aid Road Act in 1916 and a more comprehensive Highway Act in 1921. A patchwork of named auto trails, the Ozark Trail, the National Old Trails Highway, already covered much of the ground that would become Route 66. Most of them were unpaved dirt tracks barely passable in rain. The conditional nature of the route was there from the beginning. It was a path that worked because people agreed it worked. The moment a better agreement could be reached, every town that had grown up along it would discover that the road's loyalty had always been to speed, not to them. Cyrus Stevens. Avery arrived in Indian Territory as a boy in a covered wagon, his family having lost everything in the economic panic of 1873. His father drove west seeking new opportunity. Young Cyrus arrived in what would become Oklahoma, having already learned the lesson that the geography of a place is less important than the will to connect it to somewhere else. He became a teacher, then a real estate broker, then an oil investor. He built Avery Oil and Gas Company. He served as chairman of the Tulsa County Commission and shepherded the construction of the 11th Street Bridge over the Arkansas River. He joined the Oklahoma Good Roads Association, became president of the Albert Pike Highway Association, then president of the Associated Highway Associations of America. In 1923, he was appointed to the Oklahoma State Highway Commission, where he implemented a gasoline tax to fund road construction. In 1924, he was named to the Federal Joint Board of Interstate Highways, 5 men charged with numbering every road in America. Route 66 was, in its first years, not a road so much as an argument that a road could exist. The founding industry was the act of travel itself, the filling station, the motor court, the roadside diner, the tire repair shop. In 1929, a Texaco road survey found that Illinois had paved its entire portion of Route 66. Kansas was entirely paved in concrete, Missouri was 66% paved, Oklahoma was 25% improved, and the 1,200 miles of desert through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California had a combined total of 64 miles of surfaced highway. The driving time from Tulsa to Oklahoma City, 103 miles, was 6 hours in the rain, on unpaved roads that turned to black mud that swallowed tires whole. The U.S. Highway 66 Association was founded in 1927, with John Woodruff of Springfield as its first president and Avery as a driving force. In 1928, the association staged a foot race from Los Angeles to New York to put the highway on the front pages. 155 runners started in Los Angeles and followed Route 66 to Chicago and then east. 55 finished. It took 84 days. Runners covered roughly 40 miles a day. The highway made the papers. Travelers made the highway. Merchants made towns. From Springfield, Missouri, Red Cheney built a hamburger stand with a sign that read, "Giant Hamburger," until the sign proved too tall to clear nearby power lines and he had to saw off the last 2 letters. He kept the misspelled name. The drive-through window he installed became the first known drive-through in America, the arithmetic. The towns would not do out loud. Every dollar they earned depended on Route 66, remaining the only reasonable route west. There was no natural advantage. There was only the road. And somewhere in Washington, someone was always capable of drawing a different one. The drought came first. Starting in the early 1930s, a series of catastrophic dust storms stripped the topsoil from more than 100 million acres of the southern Great Plains. Farms in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, and New Mexico failed by the tens of thousands. Banks foreclosed, landlords evicted. Families who had settled the land for a generation or more loaded everything they owned onto their cars and drove west. Between approximately 1935 and 1940, the estimates run from 210,000 people to nearly 500,000. The Dust Bowl migration flowed down Route 66 in a continuous, faltering stream. Nearly 15% of Oklahoma's entire population left the state, many of them heading for California's San Joaquin Valley. The road was not entirely paved when they came. Between 1933 and 1938, thousands of unemployed young men were put to work by New Deal relief programs on the road gangs that filled the final unpaved gaps. The migrants and the laborers worked in parallel, men building the road that other men were already driving. By 1938, Route 66 became the first U.S. highway to be completely paved, just in time for the war. John Steinbeck traveled with the migrants. He visited the camps they made. Then the war ended. The soldiers came home, but many of them had trained in Arizona or New Mexico or California and had no intention of returning to the winters of Chicago or Boston. They had discovered the Southwest. They got in their cars and drove back on Route 66. One of them was Robert William Troop Jr. of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Bobby Troop, ex-Marine captain, former pianist with the Tommy Dorsey Band. Driving west on Route 66 in 1946, he wrote a song. His wife, in the passenger seat, contributed the title. When he arrived in Los Angeles, he gave the manuscript to Nat King Cole. Cole and his trio recorded it 1 week later. Get Your Kicks on Route 66 was released in 1946 and became a hit. It became Route 66's theme at the exact moment the road hit its post-war peak. And Nat King Cole and his musicians could not travel the road they were singing about freely, without fear, without a survival guide telling them which 60 miles to avoid after dark. Freedom on Route 66 carried an asterisk. In 1930, 44 of the 89 counties lining the highway were sundown towns, all white communities where Black Americans were legally prohibited from being present after dark. Across a stretch of roughly 260 miles between Oklahoma City and Amarillo, there were no facilities for Black travelers at all. 6 of the 8 states Route 66 crossed had segregation laws on their books. A Harlem postal worker named Victor Hugo Green began publishing the Negro Motorist Green Book in 1936 to tell Black travelers which gas stations would serve them, which motels would rent them a room, which diners would not turn them away, or worse. In one key edition of the Green Book, exactly 4 establishments were listed on Route 66 itself. Only 6% of the more than 100 motels in Albuquerque admitted Black customers. Black families traveling west carried shoebox lunches, fried chicken and biscuits packed at home, because stopping to eat was not a simple decision on America's Main Street. With that on the record, the boom! The post-war years were Route 66 at its most fully itself, and they were extraordinary. Americans had disposable income and paid vacations, both products of the union contracts and rising manufacturing wages of the late 1940s. Car ownership spread. Families drove to the Grand Canyon, to Disneyland when it opened in 1955, to the beaches of Southern California. The towns along Route 66 competed for their attention with an ingenuity that bordered on desperation. Neon competed with neon. Entrepreneurs built roadside attractions whose only purpose was to be impossible to drive past without stopping. There were rattlesnake pits and wax museums and trading posts and caverns where outlaws had allegedly hidden. Barns for hundreds of miles were painted with advertising for Meramec Caverns in Missouri. In the Texas Panhandle outside Amarillo, a rancher named Stanley Marsh buried 10 Cadillacs nose first in a wheat field. Cadillac Ranch, completed in 1974, became one of the most photographed spots on the road. In Catoosa, Oklahoma, a man named Hugh Davis built an 80-foot blue fiberglass whale as an anniversary gift for his wife, put it beside a pond, and opened it to the swimming public. The Blue Whale of Catoosa is still there. In Holbrook, Arizona, the Wigwam Motel rented rooms in concrete teepees under the desert stars. And in Lebanon, Missouri, the Munger Moss Motel lit its neon sign every night in a particular shade of orange that truckers could spot for 2 miles in flat country. The CBS television series Route 66 ran from 1960 to 1964. 2 young men in a Corvette, driving from town to town, finding adventure and moral complexity in every stop. It was not a documentary, and it was not realistic, but it described something real. The sense that Route 66 was a place where ordinary American life was happening at its most intense, that every roadside diner concealed a story worth hearing. By the mid-1950s, Route 66 was, in the words of historian Joe Sonderman, simply booming. Victor Hugo Green died in 1960, 4 years before the Civil Rights Act would require the motels and diners of Route 66 to serve everyone who came through their doors. He did not live to see the Golden Age declared officially open to all. He barely lived to see it declared open to some, and President Eisenhower had already signed the papers. $25 billion. That is what Congress authorized for the new interstate highway system when Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act on June 29, 1956. $25 billion for 41,000 miles of new road designed to move traffic at high speed between major cities, bypassing local character entirely. The first construction contract under the new program was signed in Missouri for a section of Route 66 to be upgraded into what would become Interstate 44. The road that built Route 66 was being disassembled into the road that would replace it. The mechanics of the killing were gradual and ruthless. The interstates were built with limited access, controlled entry and exit ramps only, no intersections, no driveways, no traffic lights. Where they paralleled Route 66, drivers no longer passed through towns. They passed beside them. On a higher grade, at 70 miles an hour, exits spaced miles apart. Businesses clustered at the exits. Downtowns emptied. The pattern was not uniform. It depended entirely on where each town's nearest interchange was placed. In some cases, the interchange sat close enough to the old Route 66 strip that businesses survived, at least for a while. In others, the bypass was absolute. The bitterest irony belongs to Joe Sonderman, who documented it clearly. Route 66 was a victim of its own success. The congestion the road had generated, the traffic crawling through every small town, stopping at every red light, had been the argument the engineers used to justify replacing it. The towns had been too good at extracting money from passing cars. Now, they would be punished for it by a road designed to make sure passing cars never stopped. There is a ledger to keep here. The interstate highway system, in its routing through urban America, cut through poor and minority neighborhoods across the country. In the 2 decades following the 1956 Highway Act, freeway construction displaced an estimated 1 million people. Where interstates ran alongside Route 66, the new franchise motels and chain restaurants that colonized exit ramps had been compelled, under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, to serve all customers. The mom-and-pop establishments along the old strip that had excluded black travelers for 30 years now competed with businesses that did not and lost ground to them, along with everything else they were losing. The bypass came for each town at its own pace. By 1972, Interstate 44 had replaced Route 66 across all of Missouri. In 1977, Illinois removed the last of its Route 66 signage from state maps. The 1975 federal road map showed Route 66 and Interstate 55 sharing a roadbed in places. The 1977 map contained no Route 66 at all. In New Mexico and Arizona, Interstate 40 crept westward through the 1970s and early 1980s, bypassing one town at a time. Texola, Oklahoma, once had 581 residents and a cotton economy and 4 gins running through the 1930s. Interstate 40 bypassed it in the early 1970s. The population today is fewer than 35 people. One business operates. The 1930 Magnolia Service Station still stands and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The old diner at the edge of town has painted on its side wall. In letters you can read from the road, "No place like Texola." One town remained. Williams, Arizona was the last section of original Route 66 to hold out. On October 13, 1984, Interstate 40 was extended past Williams, Arizona, and the last stretch of original Route 66 was bypassed. According to accounts gathered by historians of the road, people in Williams were so enraged that some of them took up arms and fired at the bulldozers and machinery working the construction site. It was all to no avail. On June 27, 1985, Route 66 was officially removed from the United States highway system. The road that had carried the Dust Bowl's refugees, the nation's wartime convoys, and 3 generations of family vacationers ceased to exist as a legal entity. It became a memory. The preservation movement began almost immediately, which says something about what the road meant. In March 1989, 15 people met in Pontiac, Illinois, to form what would become the Illinois Route 66 Association. In Seligman, Arizona, a barber named Angel Delgadillo had already moved. When Interstate 40 bypassed Seligman in 1978, the town's economy collapsed within months. Delgadillo gathered local business owners and began lobbying the state of Arizona to designate the surviving stretch of old Route 66 as a historic highway. Arizona agreed in 1987. That designation put the old alignment back on maps. It put signs on the interstate directing drivers to take the exit. It became the model for every other state along the route. Congress passed the Route 66 Study Act of 1990, recognizing the highway as a symbol of the American people's heritage of travel and their legacy of seeking a better life. Missouri, New Mexico, Arizona, and the other 6 states followed with their own preservation associations and historic designations. Today, more than 250 buildings, bridges, road alignments, and sites along Route 66 are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. More than 90% of the California route is still drivable. The Cadillac Ranch is still in Amarillo, still being spray painted by visitors. Roy's Motel and Cafe in Amboy, California, a neon sign rising from the Mojave Desert, still glows. The Wigwam Motel still rents rooms in Holbrook. The Blue Whale still watches over its pond in Catoosa. In Seligman, the barbershop of Angel Delgadillo is still open, and Delgadillo himself, now in his 90s, is still there to shake your hand. Route 66 turns 100 in 2026, and National Geographic named it one of the top places in the world to visit this year. More people are driving it now than at any point since the interstates opened. International travelers come specifically for the ghost towns, the neon, the silence, the diner pie. They come for Texola, population 35, and its painted declaration that there is no place like it. Cyrus Avery died in 1963 at 91, having lived to see the interstates already eating the road he built. He told an interviewer near the end of his life that his proudest accomplishment was not Route 66, but a 55-mile water pipeline he had helped secure for Tulsa. He barely knew how famous history would make him. His grave in Tulsa's Rose Hill Cemetery is modest and ground level, close to one of the car paths, marked by a small stone indistinguishable from the others around it. The old neon signs still light up at dusk along the empty 2-lane. They cast their colors across parking lots where no one parks anymore. They were built to pull cars off a road that no longer carries the traffic they need. They are still running. The question Route 66 always asked, will you stop or will you drive through, has not changed. The answer has.